I mean, I felt like that was making sense.
Oh,
So
cool. Because coming out of my brain, it just sounded like word salad. Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast of pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 24 years and I have about 26. So today we are doing another pattern episode. We haven't done a pattern episode in a while. We're taking a look at hip catches, and we're doing so in kind of a unique way because we're looking at some hip catches that aren't just your basic, like, hip catches. There's
Mhm.
some extra redirects and kind of fun entrances, stuff like that. So
As we go to the screen share, I'll put in the card above a link to the original YouTube video, and that'll also be in the description box below. So without further ado, first ones we're looking at are from Ben Morris and Skylar Pritchard's first place champion Jack and Jill dance at the most recent Boogie by the Bay, which I'm so excited for you, Skylar. Did you see this? Okay, to the screen share. All right, so this first one we're looking at is a really fun invention. I love how creative Ben is with just reaching for new connection points. Like,
yeah.
I know a lot of them are good at that. There's this particular way that Ben does it. It's always like, oh, I wanted to thought that's neat. So hip catches are essentially a different form of closed position, is the first thing to note. The difference being you're connecting the leader's hand to the follower's hip instead of the follower's back or shoulder blade, for example. And all of the technique that goes into a strong connection in closed position is still accurate in a hip catch. The thing that can make it more complicated is because of the height difference. Usually closed position feels a little bit more comfortable for a leader's arm to be like in a relaxed position relative to their body. Whereas with hip catches, you often find yourself as a leader in a less ergonomically comfortable position in order to create that connection. For example, Ben's arm is much lower than his waist in order to reach her hip.
I also want to add that hip catch does not mean grab organs.
Accurate.
uh, Different follows will have different space between rib and hip. Some of them are easier to grab organs
Mm-hmm.
than others. Like for me, there's not much opportunity for that. I don't have very much space between rib and hip,
Mm-hmm.
but some people do. I know you do.
I
Uh,
do.
and that's something to pay attention to. If you're going for a hip catch, it needs to be low enough or needs to be like bottom of rib cage area if you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to do like a normal hand on back.
Right. So the first thing I want to note is the physics of connecting in a hip catch. So when you're in closed position, regardless of it's normal closed or a hip catch, the center counterpoint in the connection is the leader's elbow. So one side of that elbow is going that way, the other side is going that way. So you're actually creating the rubber band effect uh, in the leader's arm because that's the entire chain is comprised of the leader's hand, arm, and body. And it's the follow's job to make sure to apply weight to the hand, but they're not creating the stretch. The leader is, because the
Mhm.
leader is the one 100% in charge of the chain. It's the leader countering with their body on the other side and the follow putting weight so the hand isn't going to travel anymore. That's what allows the leader to use that center counterpoint to create stretch and then release it.
Mhm.
So if we watch really closely, first thing Ben does is connect when he's physically closer to Skylar. So that way he has room in his arm to extend away, like I've been talking about.
Mhm.
he's leaving the hand behind and he's moving his body away. And Skylar is committing weight to that. She's also doing it in a stylized way with her arm and her hip.
Yeah.
And then that's what allows Ben to then continue driving onto his right foot and collect his left foot underneath him. And that's what leads Skylar to rotate.
Mm-hmm. I want to add something, if you don't mind.
Yes, please do.
So this is an interesting way to go about it because, like I think the first type of hip catch that most people are taught are the one where the leads are bringing the follow in front of them and switching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, the leads aren't moving, the follows are moving. This is different because in this case, Skylar is not moving, but Ben is moving. And so even though generally with the hip catches, like the follow is moving, and that's where you're getting that weight commitment and stretch from, because the follow is moving. In this case, Skylar is stopped, Ben is moving past her, and that's what's creating the stretch. And Skylar is kind of like mid foot, like she has weight on both feet. She's a little bit more committed to, I think, her left foot. But she's fairly split weight. So it's really all needing to come from what Ben is doing. And Skylar is more or less just kind of resisting in order for the weight to get into the connection, right? So it's not so much that she's leaning into it, and you can see she's not leaning into it. She's more kind of resisting him pulling on her initially a little bit.
Yeah. Instead of like releasing her left foot and trying to shift her weight back, right, she's actually releasing this foot and letting this foot be out in front of her as a brace, like you were saying. And it's very sneaky.
Yeah. So just wanted to point that out.
And then after the first hip catch, we get like a hip catch rotation. I kind of like, it feels like a scoop to me. So Ben is really quickly reaching in his right hand to catch the side of her waist. So that way she's not without connection for very long at all. It's just a couple, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. So less than a second, she is without connection. And then what he's doing is allowing her to settle into his arm. So he's waiting to lead her out until right here. Before that, it's her job to realize that she needs to sink into that connection. And you can see how pitched her body is in that direction. And I'll let you speak to that more if you would like.
Is there anything in particular you want me to talk about with it?
No, I was just wondering, like, how would you explain as a follow, how do you know that's what they want? Like, I know how to lead it.
So that's interesting. Because it typically has to do with the amount of momentum that you're feeling. And he's not initially giving her a ton of like move down the slot type of momentum. And so that's why she's ending up with kind of the momentum. She has enough so that it's making her kind of reach in front of her, but it's not sending her upper body along with it immediately. So that's kind of where that's coming in. It's not necessarily something that, like, as a follow, you are consciously thinking of. It's more like, as a follow, your baseline should be being more weighted back generally. And so when you're going into this, when you're being led through it, when you're getting to a point where there's not necessarily a lot of directional energy, you should be kind of leaning back into more of a backwards pitch of sorts. And so that's going to automatically give that lean that you're looking at, and that's what will give the extra weight that can then send you down line.
Nice.
Did that answer?
Yeah. It's just one of those things that I've always like taken for granted. I'm like, I know that's what you do.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
And you would be able to say it better than I could. Once again, this hip catch sequence from the beginning. All right, now we enter the ultimate hip catch sequence. So let's count them. We have 1, and we'll call that the same one. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's testing my arithmetic, Alicia. So the first thing I want to highlight for what Ben's doing here is he is spotting her. So you can see how his eye line finds her, and I think her hips actually is what he's looking for. So he can really aim her left hand to her own hip and then let go so he can switch to holding onto her hip. Mm-hmm. And that detail of spotting, so you know where you're sending a follow's hand, is like really important in a lot of areas in West Coast swing, but particularly in this kind of, you want to transition from a handhold to a hip catch or any other kind of catch.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add that this is kind of like what I was talking about earlier, where he's going more for the lower ribs than the actual hip.
Mm-hmm. And then there is a bit of a miscommunication because I don't think she understood that not to travel. So I'm trying to find where that happened. I think basically he wasn't able to have his body far enough this way to counter her momentum. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that? Let's look back, because she shuffles just a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because she can't quite get over her feet right here.
Yeah.
So either Ben needed to allow more rope this way, or his body be more this way relative to her to begin with. So that way her foot strike wasn't so far out ahead of her, or her body couldn't get up over top of it.
Yeah.
But great save. He's like, oh no, don't I? And he goes for a stabilizing hand. So good choice.
Yeah. And actually, while we're looking at that, one way that you can tell that there is either more energy than is necessary and or a follow isn't committing weight properly is when you have this like bend over the hand connection point. In this case, she's getting sent a little too far. And so she's not like committing a ton of weight into that, because it's kind of something that's like, it's more like a clothesline effect, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's in her way and she has the momentum to go past it. So she kind of just end up like folding over it almost. So that's how you can tell that there's not weight in a connection, or not enough.
Mm-hmm. So I said what I think Ben could have done to make this run smoother from the beginning. What would you recommend Skylar have done?
Good question. It's one of those things where, because of the momentum that she has, it's kind of hard to do too much. Mm-hmm. However, one thing that you can do as a follow when you're kind of getting too much momentum, you can kind of, instead of letting yourself fold over the hand, kind of press into it in that spot instead. And that kind of will give a little bit more room for you.
So that's the folding you're referring to, right?
Yes.
What I just drew. Okay.
Yep. Where like the the body above and below is past where the hand connection point is on the body.
Right. And that's actually one of the things that, like, if a leader does get in between the ribs and the hips, you have less structural part in your body with which to resist that send information. So, like, it's really hard to counter that in your body when it's the forces applied at that particular area.
Yeah, which is why I was saying that, like, this one in particular is kind of harder as a follow to do too much about, especially because it's like such a quick like send catch. So it'd be harder to really adjust as a follow. But I mean, when you do feel the connection with the hand, you could, in theory, put a little bit more weight there to give you a little bit more space instead of just running into it.
All right, next up, how they exit this, and the way she poses for that is such a great way of covering for the small misstep. All right, so Ben still has both hands, which is extra great for what the beginning of this sequence that we're about to go into, because he can do equal and opposite on both sides. He can draw her left side forward while encouraging her right side to remain back, and that helps prep it this first turn in a really clean way. Whereas it can be harder to lead that kind of traveling prep for an inside turn with just one hip, for example. And then after he lets go, he keeps his left fingertips in contact with her back and flips his handhold. So right now his thumb is pointing up. His fingers are still attached, and then we can't see it, but his thumb is now pointing down. So that's what his hand is doing, and that allows him to seamlessly catch her left hip right here. And this is an instance, like Alicia was pointing out with the very first sequence, Skylar wasn't going anywhere, Ben was. This is one where they're both traveling a little bit. So it's Ben's job to encourage her to sink her left hip back into his hand while simultaneously extending his arm and moving away to create that elastic rubber band effect in his own arm, and then release it. And then he does the equal and opposite with his hand. He goes from thumb down back to thumb up to catch her left hip. And then this one, it just feels very much like a whip exit, just instead of it being the back, it's the hip. And we get another scoop. Like, she is not without his connection for very long at all. Again, it's less than a second. And just like we were talking about, I think in the last example, he's leading it in such a way that is encouraging her to not travel as much. So she sinks into it. And then you get this fun acceleration out the other end. So much just happened. I'm going to run through it all, and then it's your turn. All right. One piece.
For Skylar, this is all about like allowing your body to go where it's being sent, and to really focus on pitching back, having that weight over the back foot as much as possible, which should just naturally be happening with the way that Ben is leading it. But I know that there are some times where, like as a follow, if you send your energy and your weight like down into the floor, it's harder for the lead to like direct you where they're wanting you to go with the continuous kind of momentum. And that's kind of what you need for this type of sequence, is the kind of continuous momentum. So that, I think, is the important thing to keep in mind for follows, is not sending your weight into the ground and like grounding through this whole thing. Like she is at a couple points, but it's not the whole thing. Like sometimes there are points where follows will just like ground with every step, and you don't want that in this particular instance, especially just because like you really need that momentum to keep going in order for this to work well.
Yeah. So this step right here is a really good example. So it might feel like her energy is going down into this foot, but it's mostly going that way in
Right.
opposition, which allows him to redirect it.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's like you said, like it looks kind of like she's fully grounding, but she's not really, because there is still quite a lot of momentum she has going, like right where she's being stopped and redirected immediately. Where you would see where it'd be more appropriate for you to ground and not have as much momentum is kind of like at the end of the slot or something like that, but or when you're like split weight, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But with this specifically, like you'll have when you're kind of being redirected, connecting into the hand, like you'll have some energy going a little bit down, obviously, but because you're going from being up on your toes when you're turning to sitting back over one foot. And so the heels being placed on the ground as well. That's why there's the grounding effect. But overall, there's not much change in where the energy is going. It's mostly just because there's a little bit of relaxation coming off of the toes and going into the heel. So there's a little bit, but it's not totally going into the ground.
Mm-hmm. This example you may think is not a hip catch because their hands are attached, but it is because it is still using the follow's hip to stop and redirect them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a basic roll in, roll out. If the follow's hand was higher, like in front of their ribs, you would lead from the ribs. Just because the hands are attached doesn't mean you're like pulling on the hand, like you're spinning a top or something, or revving a lawnmower. No, we're not doing that. What a follow can do to help facilitate that is to actually place the leader's hand where on the hip or on the ribs that feels good to have extra pressure and connect with. And then to let the hands just relax and be like a medium through which information flows, and then provide the hip connection. So Ben can do his best to like get the height of the hand right around where her hips are. And then it's her job to make sure he's not wringing her out. So she's not like releasing her arm across her body. And she's putting her hand where it's comfortable. And then he's able to lead from her right hip and not by pulling on her hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to add. As a follow in this type of wrap in, wrap out, you shouldn't be feeling like a pulling from the shoulder to the hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's more going to be just kind of a placement feel. And depending on like where you have your hand, there might be a little bit more stretch or a little bit less stretch feeling in the arm, but it's not like you're being yanked like with the hand through the arm. That should not be the feel. It should be overall fairly relaxed, because the connection isn't coming from him pulling on the hand. It's coming from the connection on the waist or the hip.
Yep. That was the last example from this dance. Now we're moving on to an older video. I actually wouldn't mind doing a whole episode on this dance because it's so fun. Also, Melissa hasn't aged.
Yeah.
I'm just like, wait, this was like 10 years ago. It's a little,
Sean has.
a little alarming. Yes. Sean looks like a baby in this video. It's amazing. All right. So this first one is something similar to what we saw with Ben and Skylar. But we're just seeing it on a different pair. So you can see how Melissa pitches back to stay connected into Sean's right hand.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to elaborate on what Melissa is or is not doing differently than what Skylar did in this context?
Skylar was more upright in general. Melissa is kind of more sitting back into things. And so you can just kind of see that angle in her body throughout the whole thing, where like with Skylar, it kind of went from like upright to slight angle to upright. And that just has to do with the way that Melissa connects. I think it's a little bit heavier in terms of the way that she's leaning back, because it's not like Skylar doesn't have her weight back through it. It's more just Melissa has it a little bit more so.
Mm-hmm. So what are the contexts that follow that's trying to find what is right for them would make them pick like Skylar's version over Melissa's or vice versa?
So good question. I mean, I think it has to do with who your partner is. Because I would say in this situation, like Skylar and Ben are more comparable in terms of like height and whatnot. And Melissa is definitely shorter than Sean, smaller than Sean. So she's able to do more of that pitching back where he'll be fine countering that. Whereas with Skylar, she probably needs to be a little bit more upright because her and Ben are more of this, like a similar size in general. So that I would say is one thing to take a look at for that.
I just want to make a note about the hand placement. So as Melissa is doing this half rotation from her right foot to her left, Sean's hand is like wrapping around to the front of her abdomen, but there isn't pressure on her abdomen. The pressure is coming from his wrist on her side. You don't want to apply pressure to a partner's abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking like that was like a sugar push variation for the longest time. And I just, did you get to miss that? Or was that also part of your Baby Westie days? It was still alive and well when I started.
Yeah, I think I missed that. If I didn't, I just don't remember it.
Blocked it from your brain.
It's also very possible.
It's like
Erin said, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. So imagine starting a sugar push by leading with a leader's left, follower's right. Then you let go. And as a leader, you step to your left and then you put your right hand out in front of you to touch the follow's abdomen and absorb there and lead back from there. It is, I think it also came from a time where there was less pounds per square inch in the connection. So like originally it wasn't as murderous, but then people try to use that in today's context of connection and it's just, ow.
Yeah.
It's not
I think that I still I remember those, but I don't think that it was a super common thing when I started.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of tail end of those being popular.
Oh my God. Yeah. You missed out.
Yeah.
No, you were lucky. Did you think of what you wanted to say?
I did. So what the other thing I was going to say is how much you want to add into the connection to create more or less kind of a spring, more momentum. It depends. And that's another thing to think about. If you're wanting to add more to it, then you're going to want to be more pitched back. If you want to add less to it, if you want to have a little bit more control or be able to stop yourself a little bit easier, then being upright is going to be, or more upright is going to be a little bit better choice for you. But if you're wanting to really add that momentum and kind of help to spring yourself, you're going to want to choose to be more pitched backwards.
Awesome. Next. So here is one of the more unconventional hip catches that we have for today. And since you're the one that found this, I will let you start.
Yeah, so this is interesting because the way that they're going into it, there's actually a hip catch on the opposite side first. Right, so usually when you go into a hip catch pattern where the follow is in front of the lead, you're going to send and catch on the right side first. But because of the way that they're going into it, Melissa is actually connecting with the left side first. And then Sean is kind of using where she's at to just kind of go with it, and is actually staying basically connected to her the whole time on both sides, rather than seeing like normally, you know, there's kind of more of a toss effect to it. And that's not really what's happening here.
By how he's lifting his hands away, that the pressure is his wrists on her sides. It's not his palms or his fingers.
Yeah. So that's the gist of this. Do you want to talk about anything else in detail?
Let's see. So this is where placement of the hip catch hand is like super important. So I want you to notice how quickly Sean starts dissociating the two handholds. This is a pattern where both either hand has a very different trajectory through the whole thing. And he is very much aiming with his left hand, her right, low first, and he's letting her catch up to it. So if you notice, this handhold actually goes down and towards her a little bit. And because of that, this hand is actually traveling a lot in order to accommodate that. It is like a rub your belly, pat your head kind of thing. It can feel like that as a leader. But if you were to try to lead like the same trajectory with both hands, the follow would get super confused. So this is a really important instance where you need to know what each hand needs to be doing. A good example that I think most people can picture in their heads is leading a sugar tuck with a leader's left hand versus leading a sugar tuck with the leader's right hand. With the leader's left hand, the hand doesn't have to go very far to clear the follow's head in time for them to have their 3 and 4. Whereas with a sugar tuck with the leader's right hand, you are having to cross their body before the 3 and 4 so they can have their 3 and 4. So you're having to cover more distance in the same amount of time when you're leading a sugar tuck with the leader's right hand. And so that's kind of what's going on here in a more complex way. All right. So here we have what I think is going on is Sean was going for a hip catch, and then Melissa was like, reverse whip. Do you concur?
It's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, the reason why I say that, so first of all, the way he is releasing the handhold is a little bit more straight. There's less rotation from what his hand is doing. It's actually getting moved across her because of what her hand is doing, because she's very like prepped to rotate. And then the other thing I'm seeing from him, so he displaces his foot underneath him and he really extends that right foot back, which to me sounds like he's going to do a step and drag, like a very much, hello audience, I am here. But Melissa is turning too fast. That's what she wanted to do. And that's fine. My big takeaway, it's okay to have miscommunications.
Yeah.
Because he catches on real quick.
I just wanted to, I think it's kind of a different angle to look at where the hand placement is. And just kind of where he's aiming. Right, because originally when he's releasing it, he's kind of aiming lower, right? So he's really going for hip, but he kind of adjusts as they move through.
And I think like the thing that made it difficult is there's just so much space between them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in part reason why she was on the mission to rotate versus him being like, let's do a hip catch, which is
Yeah.
only a quarter rotation for her. If they had been closer, there probably would have been less opportunity for miscommunication. But it's also possible that Melissa knew that's why he was leaving, and she was like, nah.
Yeah.
Also a possibility.
Yep.
Next up, we have another Melissa video, but this time with Maxence. That's all the introduction I need to do.
Yep. It's Maxence with blonde.
All right, this first sequence is another doozy of a sequence. So we have a reverse whip with a like hip catch variation, and he ends up throwing her right arm behind her to catch with his right hand. And for those to feel comfortable, you need to make sure the follow isn't traveling anywhere. And as a leader, you are doing all of the reaching and they're not having to clothesline themselves behind them or hammerlock themselves behind them and ow. And then this is another instance of he has access to her ribs or her hip, and that's what he's leading to unravel her. He is not pulling on the hand. And then real quick, you can kind of see his left hand is already ready to catch her right or her waist. Wow. He is going so fast. He's like, there's no time for hip. We're doing waist. That's the thing for this sequence. There is no time. And he's using her waist to redirect her. So she's kind of like spinning around a cushiony barrier or spinning inside a cushiony barrier that she kind of bounces off of.
Right. I was going to add that, yeah, the hand placement on this is a little bit middle.
Not the best. Yeah, it's more waist.
Which is true, but for this, because she doesn't have a lot of directional like momentum, like one way down the slot, it's a little bit different. Like you can place the hand there a little bit more gently when there's more of that rotational energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're going for, as opposed to like karate chopping somebody in the in the organs. That's a little different.
I remember there was this wonderful workshop from Jordan and Tot at TAP, I think in the before times. Really fun workshop. But there was like 3 leaders in the rotation that somehow thought you judo chop the liver to stop the follow moving down the slot. Like I assume all the other follows of more standard sizing were having no problem whatsoever. But I was like, ow. But wait, there's more. I don't know if this has a name, but if you want to learn how to do it, myself, Phoenix Gray, Kilbasa, obviously Maxence, we all know how to do that. So just hit us up in person sometime. I don't know how to apply words to what the right shoulder and arm is doing to remain connected to both parties and to not dislocate anything. You gotta demo that in person kind of situation. But he releases her to turn and then does a very common like hip catch, spin, redirect, hip catch, spin, redirect combo. This is something you see like a lot. It's a really common thing to do in West Coast swing. And I just wanted to highlight how that works because it's a combination of 2 different things that we've been seeing. The follow rotating but hanging back in the hip catch in order to be led out of it. And then the next part, which is the hip catch, where the leader is then creating like this braking force in opposition. So one is the follow and the leader kind of like hanging out together, and the other one is in opposition. I know my words are doing awful things. So your turn. And I will collect myself.
I mean, I felt like that was making sense.
Oh, cool. Because coming out of my brain, it just sounded like word salad.
With Melissa, I mean, the main thing here is like we've been talking about her staying kind of not so much just pitched back here because there is that rotation in the hand switch. So it changes it a little bit. But for this, like you kind of have to be like in connection with the point of contact like that you need to be leaning into that is kind of a good way to think about this for a follow because you are being rotated like it's kind of like moving around a barrier instead of like being stopped from one point in like a cushy manner. So it's different. She's transitioning kind of through being pitched back, but then there's also her kind of leaning into the sides as well.
So if I hold forward so you can see it at speed, there's a really clear pulse. So there's a pause and a go.
Mm-hmm.
So pause, go, pause, go. And the pause is happening when Melissa is on her right foot and Maxon's has her right hip. And then the go is when he releases and he's using his right hand around her waist to do the scooping action. So that's what I was talking about before. So scoop, catch, and pause. Scoop.
Yeah.
And the scoop, the thing to learn to do as a leader is you want to remember that your forearm is just as important, if not more important, for the connection. That's like the main thing your follow is like spinning around inside of. And you want to make sure you're sturdy, but not so sturdy that they can't get over top of their feet. So if you are, I'm going to try to do this in a small way. So it's along the swing. So if you've got a follow over here in this hand, this is my left hand, believe it or not. And you want to toss the follow over to this hand. If you just like toss and you don't actually move this hand, you're not actually absorbing it and doing the scooping. So you got to toss, absorb, and redirect. Toss, absorb, and redirect. And you're doing that like with your whole arm. So that way the follow can get over top of their feet for that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about with Melissa. She's getting over top of that foot, and that's what is connecting to that outside. She's not pitching back to do that. It's like a connection sideways because she's getting up over that foot.
Both sections together, hold forward. Last one. I wanted to highlight this one because everything you can do with a hip catch, you can do with a shoulder catch instead. And sometimes that can be really helpful just for height differences. Like I remember one time Patty Bow was teaching a workshop here in Portland a long time ago. Oh my goodness. It was teaching a basic hip catch. And I asked her, real talk, how do I do that with you? So I'm 5'11", she's really tiny. And for me to do a hip catch with her, my arm is literally ramrod straight. And my she's like running into my palm. Like I can't actually get around to the front. My arm is literally not long enough for our height difference. So if that's the case and you don't want to work that hard, that's okay. Just do shoulder catches instead. So like this pattern in particular, which I believe is stolen from salsa, if I remember correctly, Maxon's arms are not long enough to do this in a hip catch form. So that's why it's a shoulder form. Go gadget arms. And let's see. So with a shoulder, you either want to be, if you're on top of the shoulder, be like on top or on the side. Yeah, fingers around the back. So that way the pressure is, so pretend this is my shoulder and like the pressure is here. You're not clamping down or pulling down in any way, shape, or form. You just want a wall that the follow shoulder can run into. If you're getting the arm, some follows are just not comfortable with the upper arm being where you're connecting. I know for me personally, I prefer either the shoulder or just above the elbow as a connection point.
Yeah, grabbing like here can sometimes feel uncomfortable, especially if there's a lot of energy that you're trying to stop. It kind of feels a little bit like you're getting claustrophobic.
Yeah. So that was hip catches. Tried to cover a really large variety for everybody. Let us know if you have any questions. If there's a hip catch you've seen out in the wild and you're like, what about this one? Just let us know.
Yeah.
And if there are any other patterns, no matter how normal, basic, or specific and bonkers you want us to go over, feel free to let us know those too.
Or if there's just anything you want us to cover on an episode, let us know. Video topic.
Yep.
Cool. We're open to suggestions. We've been doing it for a while, so.
I know. Like, we're on year 4. What is this?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will catch you later.